Well, we here at RT have extensively covered hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's called, the risks it poses, dangers, as well as economic benefits the controversial procedure poses. Either way, the practice is expanding. Take a look at this. This is a breakdown of the U.S. energy projection for 2012. The forecast for coal-generated electricity is expected to fall below 40%. That's the lowest level since the government started collecting this data all the way back in 1949. Meanwhile, natural gas use is on the rise. It will be used to produce 29% of electricity, up from 20% in 2008. Nuclear energy production now accounts for 20% of electricity, and the remainder of energy comes from renewable energy sources. So utilities companies are actually ditching the much coveted coal for natural gas, and the more the supply of natural gas grows, the cheaper it gets. People on both sides of the issue are passionate about their position. Those who support fracking say it paves the way for energy independence and creates thousands of jobs in a tough economy. Those against it say the dangers outweigh the benefits in this case. One of them is director of Gasland. Here is a look at his documentary.
6 states have documented over 1,000 incidents of groundwater contamination.
It bubbles and hisses when it comes out. I won't drink it.
They can drill whether we like it or not.
It's a free-for-all. Our water was good before they started drilling, and when they got done, it was bad.
Obviously, we have a problem here.
Whoa, Jesus Christ.
Well, Josh Fox is the filmmaker and activist and director of Gasland, what you just saw a clip of, and he joins me now to discuss more about our energy future. Welcome, Josh. So I guess whether we like it or not, the country seems to be shifting away from coal to natural gas. Your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't pose it as an inevitability in that sense. Obviously, getting rid of coal is a really good thing. Coal is a horrible, horrible fuel. We've seen a century worth of damage to the environment from using coal. Natural gas has sold itself as a cleaner burning alternative to coal, and those were benefits that were talked about to the environmental community and to the government, and it's not true. Research at Cornell University and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, have shown that there is no appreciable benefit to switching to gas over coal in terms of climate change. So much methane actually vents off of these sites when they're drilling for gas that you're contributing methane into the atmosphere in enormous quantities. Methane is many, many more times more potent than than CO2 is in the atmosphere. So there is actually an offset here. Although it burns cleaner, we're venting off enormous amounts of methane in the atmosphere, and there's absolutely no benefit there from the climate perspective.
Now, proponents of fracking say that really what is mostly being used is water. What is it, 99.9 or 99.5% of it is water. And if this technique is done correctly, that this is a sustainable and environmentally friendly way of getting energy, if it's done correctly.
Well, I've never heard anybody but the natural gas industry say that fracking was sustainable or environmentally friendly. Yeah, there's a lot of water involved. You're talking about 2 to 7 million gallons of water per frac. Some of the chemicals that they use, and so what you're talking about here in an overall perspective is an enormous quantity of chemicals per frac per well. And those chemicals contaminate water in very, very small amounts. When we're talking about benzene, I think it's 5 parts per billion of benzene in a groundwater, in an aquifer. It becomes extremely, extremely unhealthy. In Pavilion, Wyoming, where the EPA just showed that fracking was the likely cause of contamination of the groundwater aquifer there, they had 50 times the safe level of benzene in the groundwater. Chemicals from this process are migrating into aquifers. We know that. As well as the gas. They have an enormous problem, as you saw the clip of the water being lit on fire, of gas migration coming from cement casing failure and other problems in the process. But the industry knows full well that they have an enormous problem on their hands of their cement casing, which is the part of the well which is supposed to protect groundwater, failing at enormous rates. Industry's own documents show that 6% of those cement barriers, which are 1 inch and have to 1 inch in diameter and have to extend 3 miles along the entire well bore, 6% of those fail upon installation, and 60% of them fail.
Now,
in a 30-year
on
period.
the subject of
That means
well water,
that
Josh, because you're saying that it gets polluted into the well water. I read a lot of articles that say that it's not fracking itself that leads to the contamination of these wells. What leads to the contamination is that these wells are not properly sealed. So if we can properly seal these wells, do we then have a solution to that problem?
It's an engineering impossibility. When we're talking about 1 inch of cement, cement cracks, cement leaks. The industry knows this very well, and they've been trying to solve this problem for decades, and they've written about it extensively in their own internal documents and in things that were published. We're talking about having to go back and fix gas wells, not in a 10-year period or a 30-year period that those wells are producing, over eternity. Because a gas well and the casing has to have integrity forever if we're going to protect the groundwater that it's piercing through, because they drill through the aquifers when they're going for the gas. But we know that these things have an enormously high rate of failure. 6% immediately upon drilling means you're going to have 6 incidents where it's possible for gas and chemicals to migrate every time you drill 100 wells, and they drill thousands of wells. So the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection showed in 2010 6.2% of wells were leaking gas. In 2011, 6.2 of new wells percent of new wells were leaking gas. 7.2 thus far in 2012. This is not a fixable problem. It is economically and technically impossible for them to prevent it. And they're going to be, if they were to assume any liability, they'd have to be fixing these wells for eternity.
So clearly there have been many problems associated with fracking. Proponents say that if it's done correctly, that these things can be avoided. Another thing that the Pennsylvania Labor and Industry Department touts when it comes to fracking is that 48,000 new jobs were created in the state through fracking. And natural gas is becoming the U.S.'s #1 export. And using coal, as we had mentioned before, comes with its own environmental concerns. And
but the question, it's the wrong question to say it's gas versus coal. We know that we can run the world on renewable energy. Wind, solar, geothermal. And these create much longer-term jobs than a quick boom and bust economy in the gas industry. Plus, when you look at these small number of jobs, which are consistently overstated by the gas industry, and you look at all of the economic drivers that gas drilling destroys. For example, in New York State, top 2 industries, agriculture and tourism. Nobody wants to take a vacation in a gas field. It's not a healthy environment to be producing food in a gas field. When we're talking about contamination of the water supply, we're talking about a $30 billion treatment facility that would treat New York City's water alone. These are the wrong questions and the wrong numbers. When we're talking about, it's not about gas versus coal. It's about fossil fuels and continuing our addiction and dependency on them.
Okay, if it's not gas versus the fracking, what people say it is about is energy independence, which is very important in terms of foreign policy and for our own domestic issues to have energy independence. And a lot of people are saying that this is paving the way for that here in the U.S.
Well, as you just pointed out, it's the #1 export, which means that this has nothing to do with energy independence. They are proposing pipelines that cut across the southern tier of New York State. One of them is called, ironically, the Constitution Pipeline, which is to connect frack gas fields in PA that have been the places which you had so many problems, and send that gas to liquefied natural gas plants that are being proposed along the coast of the eastern seaboard to sell the gas in Europe. This is a developing country exploitation model. This is their business model. Their business model is to take the resources from the United States, care less about what they contaminate, and sell it overseas for a higher price. That is the model. And anybody who says it's about energy independence can be corrected by understanding that the only true energy independence is with renewable energy. We can't export the sun. We can't export the wind.
So you're saying we can become 100% energy efficient strictly on wind and solar? as a nation?
We can run the world on renewable energy. I'll point to an amazing front-page Scientific American article by Professor Mark Jacobson at Stanford, in which he lays out exactly the way that we can get the world's energy from renewable energy. And when we're talking about building an enormous infrastructure of pipelines, compressor stations, all the natural gas infrastructure, which is polluting and emits leakage, as I pointed out earlier, for a short-lived resource, which we know is going to be contaminating the places where it is developed, it doesn't make any sense. We have the technology now to move towards renewable energy. What we need is the political will. We need actual leaders who will bring us into the 21st century and say, wow, actually,
all right.
this is the way.
Sorry, last question here, Josh, because we are out of time. So basically, do you want to see fracking, hydraulic fracturing, eliminated in the U.S.?
I mean, we have to end our dependency on fossil fuels from so many different perspectives. From the perspective of climate change, from the perspective of water contamination, from the perspective of our democracy. One thing that we haven't looked at enough is the fact that these fossil fuel giants influence policy enormously. They spent $747 million lobbying Congress to get the Safe Drinking Water Act exemption. That is a contamination of our democracy. So absolutely, we need to cease fracking, and we also need to make very, very strong moves away from fossil fuels in general.
All right, Josh, thank you very much for coming on the show. That was activist and filmmaker Josh Fox, director of Gasland.
Thank you.